California desert. By March 2017, I wondered who I would be after everything was said and done. I felt prepared and ready to hit the ground running. My girlfriend Kara drove me out to San Diego, and we stayed there a few days before I started my ride. It was good to have a little vacation with her before I left. We packed up my red Mazda 5 van and started our 2-day drive to Whale's Vagina. Most of the scenery through Kansas and New Mexico was boring, but we were met in Arizona with a sea of cacti and spectacular red sunsets. I was already wondering what the desert would be like, and this painting of the sandy abyss gave me solace. We stayed with my friend Chris, who had ridden the California coast with me in 2014. Chris is a built, handsome man who epitomizes a California surfer in physique and a Philadelphian in character. 10 years older than me and also a skateboarder. He spent 10 years in active duty military service and is very laid back, hilarious, and introspective. Speaking with a thick East Coast accent, he quickly throws anyone under the bus with his wit. We both have a similar sense of humor, always making sarcastic remarks about our surroundings and creating hypothetical situations based on our imaginary contexts. I would consider us kindred spirits. Chris took a few days off of work to join me on the first push of my trip to Joshua Tree National Park. Neither of us had ever visited Joshua Tree, and he romanticized the idea of biking and camping in the desert. I've known him to be hungry for adventure, so bringing him on board was a relatively easy sell. Chris only had 5 days for the trip, so he could still return to work by Monday. Joshua Tree is about 160 miles by car from San Diego, but we took the longer bicycle route. This entailed catching a train north to Oceanside and riding 2 85-mile days into the high desert. 2 tough days. I didn't plan the trip to start out this way, but I figured why not let Chris's ambition kick my ass. I realized afterward that these 2 days prepared me more for the rest of the trip than I could have anticipated. Let the pain begin. Chris likes to navigate using real-time Google Maps. I let him take the lead since it was his idea to ride 85-mile days. Every morning, we confirmed our final resting destination, and that was the only information we could hold on to if we got lost from each other. Chris was a stronger rider than I, and we got separated hourly. We took the 10 a.m. train to Oceanside and were on the road by 11 a.m. The beginning of the trek was not so bad. The phone took us on 30 miles of bike path, then spit us into the agricultural countryside. It wasn't significantly populated, and we were thankful to have 2-lane asphalt roads that felt relatively safe. We passed plenty of places for food and water, so that also gave us a sense of safety. We rode through avocado country and got smiles from all the farmers working in the fields. Being from the Midwest, I see a lot of corn, wheat, and soybeans. Something that struck me was the colors of the California crops. Rolling hills of kale, grapes, oats, oranges, strawberries, and other leafy greens. I couldn't help but think about the unfortunate consequences of these crops, though. The reality of water shortage in much of the western United States. Agriculture in the West uses significantly more water than humans consume in most major cities. In the 20th century, we started forcing massive tracts of western dry land to be used for agriculture, and that's had complicated implications for water rights and the dependability of our water sources even up to this day. Oh, the dichotomy of the West's beauty and humans' manifest destiny interaction with it. My bike was 40 pounds heavier than Chris's, which made a big difference when the flat fields turned into the first elevation gain of the day. We ascended tumultuous switchback foothills not too long after lunchtime. Around the 5-hour mark, our smooth paved road slowly turned to chalky dirt and we climbed a red clay mountain. As we lost daylight, Maps decided to play an April Fool's joke on us. It sent us on a dirt road that headed straight into a field. The map showed legitimate roads, but we kept getting deeper and deeper into a grassy prairie that resembled more of a jungle than an actual road. Huge rocks extruded from the ground. Overgrown grass and plants gave us no definitive path to follow. It kept growing thicker and thicker. Chris was confident in following Google Maps bike directions, so I continued to let him be the faithful captain of this ship. We were literally acres into this field before realizing no road was left. The only way out was to continue in any direction to find a paved road. We used our phones as a compass and ran into an iron gate that read, Nature Preserve. There were no legitimate roads, only vague paths that park rangers could access with off-road vehicles. I immediately thought, we better get out of here before we get a ticket. We physically lifted our loaded bikes over the 4-foot gate and walked ourselves close to a mile through the weeds to find the closest road. We had to ride another hour towards the state park campground in complete darkness. It was 9 p.m. when we set up camp, and I was utterly exhausted from frustration. I was also laughing at the fact that Google pranked us. I was losing my mind day one. We soon realized the state park was half a mile from a dirt racing track. This particular night was the season opener, and the races were in full swing. I didn't sleep well since we could hear those loud engines revving until midnight. This is precisely the kind of soul-crushing experience that could propel me through the next 5 months. The next day proved even more trying on our patience and stamina than the jungle safari previous. We climbed mountains almost immediately after leaving the state park around 6 a.m. After I ate 2 Subway sandwiches for lunch, Google sent us to the entrance of the Coahuila Band of Indians reservation. This road was the only available path east besides Interstate 10. We tried to haggle with the guards at the reservation entrance. Still, they had no sympathy for us weary cyclists attempting to pass through. Chris didn't like the idea of riding on the interstate, and I was mostly concerned about the illegality of it. We got creative and found an access road next to the train tracks parallel to the interstate. What we hoped would be a paved thoroughfare was actually a sea of large loose rocks begging for a flat tire. We rode a few miles through the rock valley before finally finding asphalt. Unfortunately, this part of the road had innumerable potholes blanketing a downhill that could easily crush our bikes. I'd been riding bikes long enough to know speed plus holes equals funeral. We successfully froggered our way through the treacherous terrain unscathed. Chris and I looked at each other at the end and just said, fuck. We were mostly relieved that our taints weren't being pounded by those holes. It was another laugh in the face of adversity moment, even though we would have preferred laying out on the train tracks to get run over at that point. We were finally forced to take I-10 for about 5 miles. Fortunately, a tailwind hyper-boosted us all the way. That same wind became the bane of our existence for the following 2 to 3 hours. As we headed north, the landscape turned from flat sand into rolling hills climbing toward the high desert. We found ourselves pushing into 1,500 feet of elevation gain, mountainous curved highways with no shoulder, and a hellish crosswind to create my life's most challenging riding conditions. I was genuinely scared for my life riding through that curved valley. It was like choosing between being hit by a 65-mile-an-hour Civic or falling off a cliff. We rode as close as possible to the metal railing, knowing that cars could hardly see us around each bend. We were crawling at about 3 miles an hour and attempted to stay fearless. I'm personally afraid of heights, and every time I looked over the edge, less than a foot to my right, I planned my own funeral in my mind. We made it to the top by the grit of our teeth and took a well-deserved break at the first fruit stand we saw. After a quick jaunt of flat terrain, we climbed yet another 800 plus feet of elevation into the darkness of night. We finally arrived at Joshua Tree, California at 10 p.m. I was physically and emotionally drained, and I needed my diaper changed. About 20 miles before entering Joshua Tree, I recognized a rash developing on my taint and ass from the intense day of riding. My ass was on fire. It's a general practice to lube padded bike shorts with Vaseline, which I had done. Even the most prepared shorts won't hold up to an entire day of sweating in direct sunlight. When we arrived at the campsite entrance, we were greeted by an unmarked sandy road. Literally sand. The sandy descent started with a packed consistency, while slowly transforming into complete toes on the sand beach. Did I mention this was all happening in pitch black darkness under starlight? I lost Chris and was trying to hold in all my frustration. I reached my wit's end as the road dipped back into an ascent, and I pushed my 130-pound bicycle up a loose sand mountain to search for this random camping spot that Chris claimed existed. I lost my mind halfway up the hill from the pain of my rash. The bike shorts kept cutting into my skin, and the saltiness of the sweat was scraping it bare. All I wanted to do was let my balls free and drink the whiskey cola I had picked up in town. I finally broke down and threw my bike to the ground, while simultaneously ripping my clothes off as fast as I could. I cursed obscenities into the sky. All I needed was for my skin to be friction-free so my body could be released from this agony. As I lay in the sand prostrate before the Lord, Chris was at the top of the hill finding our camp. I pulled myself together, got my swimming trunks on, and somehow willed my bike to the top of that forsaken sand hill. I started trenching through bushes and various drop-offs, using Chris's headlamp in the distance as my guide. Not without tripping over a couple of bushes in the process. I was in tears as I set up my tent and cooked a quick dinner. I had a crazed look as I stared adversity in the face and wondered if this was my fate. Such an overbearing 2 days. Would the rest of the trip be worth it, I wondered. We woke up to a beautiful panoramic view of red and orange mountains resting below a cloudless blue sky. We appreciated the view and agreed getting up there was worth the turmoil. After a quick breakfast in town, we cruised into Joshua Tree National Park, a few miles away. We were greeted by a park ranger who reminded us we should drink at least a gallon of water per day if we weren't hiking, and more if we were. That gave me a reality check of what to expect from my body in the coming weeks. The park sits in a high desert between a series of mountains. It is known for its beautiful rock formations and Joshua trees. The Yucca brevifolia, or Joshua tree, is a part of the agave family and is found in seemingly endless amounts within the park. Besides the natural beauty, the park is also known for inspiring artists of all mediums. I hoped to experience some of this inspiration for myself. I have to say, it did create some calmness within my soul, but Chris and I's inspiration of choice was satire. We workshopped a sketch where a musician comes to Joshua Tree to write music, but isn't inspired by the landscape. He just thinks it's dull and dusty. This character eventually quits music altogether and becomes an accountant. He forgets he ever loved art. Give up on your dreams, kids. We rode for miles through the park and eventually found a hiking trail. We pushed our bikes through a quarter mile of loose sand to camp in between two large bushes. The wind gradually picked up as the day went on, and we attempted to situate ourselves for some kind of protection. The constant eastern wind blows hard. Chris estimated the gusts reached 60 miles an hour. These sturdy bushes thankfully acted as a windbreak for us. We were deciding what to eat for dinner, and Chris told me that he got a hot tip from some rock climbers he met in the parking lot earlier. They told him about a cheap meal that gives you tons of calories called a ramen bomb. It's when you boil your water and cook the ramen noodles, but before you turn the heat off, you put a bag of instant garlic mashed potatoes in and mix it all up. We both tried it and were pleasantly surprised. I might have to make this a regular part of my diet. Chris had been talking in detail about the desert sunsets for months before the trip. Once we finally got there, I understood his romanticism about this daily occurrence. That night, the sun seemingly took up half the landscape with its vast orange expanse, bouncing vivid waves of light off the mountain backdrop. We watched the glowing orb quickly fall behind the mountains as the horizon lit up with only the silhouette of the mountain peaks and pastel rays behind it. The gnarly thing about sunsets in the desert is the drop in temperature. We lost 15 degrees in 30 minutes. After the sun was completely gone, the temperature dropped even further. I bundled up in my sleeping bag, thankful for an adequate tent to shield me from the wind. A much more comfortable experience from my 2014 mishap in Northern California. We only spent a day and a half in the park. It was such a large expanse we couldn't efficiently cover it all by bicycle. We rode between the city of Joshua Tree and 29 Palms to see the essentials. We climbed porous rocks, saw Skull Rock, and marveled at the Joshua trees. It's a treasure that we have a national park system to protect lands such as this. It inspires me to dream and appreciate the country we live in. Sometimes. We left the park and arrived in 29 Palms, California around 3:30 p.m. Before traveling into the unknown, we needed to stock up on snacks and water. We snuck our 6 liters of liquid receptacles into a McDonald's. We tried not to look weird while filling them all slowly, one by one, at the soda fountain. Of course, we bought ice cream too, so we weren't complete freeloaders. We headed east towards another desert camping spot 25 miles from town, BLM camping. In certain parts of the United States, the Bureau of Land Management facilitates arid plots of land, BLM for short. This land is essentially uninhabitable, and the government allows anyone to roam it how they please for up to 2 weeks. You only have to be 300 feet from any roadway, which usually means you need a 4-wheel drive vehicle, or in our case, use foot or bicycle. We saw a sign outside of town that said no services for 100 miles. That's when I knew my bicycle life was really starting. All my planning and mapping would make or break my livelihood. We set up camp in the sand and enjoyed another picturesque sunset. Chris leaves tomorrow, and the implications of this trip started to set in for me. I'm losing a great travel partner and a fantastic person to process life with. I learn something new every time we take adventures together. He also knows how to bust my chops. Maybe I need more of that in my life. I had no clue how hard it would be to be alone in the desert. The heat and treacherous landscape were already concerning, but not having a friend beside me might be the most challenging part. The next day, Chris ended up riding 140 miles non-stop and slept on the side of the road. He had to get back to San Diego to be at work Monday morning. I didn't hear about his adventure until 3 days later because I had lost all my phone service. I was off to start the beginning of my solo travel. I spent 160 miles riding through the Mojave Desert. I hardly saw 5 cars the entire time. The landscape felt straight out of a Western movie. How desolate it felt out there on Highway 62. Being alone felt calming, yet I was burning with uneasiness. I was at the mercy of the elements, the animals, and the landscape. Water only exists from what I can carry. Food is only what I keep. Conservation and preparation are what keep me alive and motivated. The roads disappear in front and behind me while my brain redefines time and distance. Endless seas of sand are surrounded by pastel mountain shapes that seem a state's distance away. No trees, no people, no society. Silence, sun, heartbeat. My only sense of length is the mile markers provided by the road. The poetic sands of time. The isolation of the desert forced me to hone in on my inner self, learn, think, and process. I personally had been struggling with the emotional demons of heartbreak and mild abandonment. Life happens, people change, and responsibilities prioritize our directions in life. This intense isolation forced me to make friends with these bastards in the back of my head. I was honestly pretty angry, and nothing is better than letting off some steam to the universe on a 2-lane highway in the middle of the Mojave. 5 days into the trip, I was already exhausted, with myself, the sun, and the unnecessary gear I needed to unload and mail home. As I was stuck in my internal dialogue, I contemplated everyone who said they would never take a trip like this. Everyone who thought I was crazy for taking this risk. Maybe I'm doing this trip to prove I'm not like them. What if I want to separate myself?